Story 1. Back in 2007, my grandpa finally lost his 20-year battle with leukemia. My grandma could have managed well, being alone in the house they've lived in for almost 60 years. We moved my grandma to an assisted living residence a few months later, and for insurance reasons, vacant property, my parents asked me if I'd like to move into the house so that I could watch the house and also to move out and not live at home. I said, absolutely. I remember that right after he passed away, strange things started happening. The portrait we had of him in the living room fell off its hook. Picture frames containing pictures of him were flipped onto their fronts during the night. I didn't mind though, because I thought my grandma was making it up. Before I moved in, my family got a big dumpster so we could clean some of the clutter out of the house. Since we'd spend most of the day cleaning and it was summer, we'd bring the family dog with us. My grandpa loved our dog dearly, but since he passed away, my dog wouldn't go down to the basement anymore, where my grandpa spent most of his time in his office. She refused to go into the basement at all and barked at the stairs a few times. That was weird, since our dog almost never barked. It finally made me think, he's here. I moved in shortly after. While I lived there, things went missing all the time. I had bought a new lock set to change the back door lock, brought it home and put it in the cupboard to tackle on the weekend. A few days later, I went to change the lock and it's gone. After a week of looking around, I finally found it in the trunk of my uncle's old BMW 2002, which he stored in the garage. I happened to be looking at the car. My grandpa was always a prankster, so I almost came to expect these occurrences. He used to wake up at 5:30 every morning to listen to the early news on the radio in the kitchen. I'd wake up some mornings and the radio would be on. I often heard typewriter noises coming from his office in the basement. It became comforting. I found myself talking to my grandpa out loud, having conversations with him. I missed him. After about 6 months, suddenly I wasn't hearing any noises anymore. Nothing was going missing. The radio wasn't turning on at 5:30. I shrugged it off for a few days, but it started to worry me. I went back to my parents and grabbed the dog, bringing her back. She was apprehensive at first, but she entered the house. There was an issue though. Every time she'd been over since my grandpa passed away, as I mentioned earlier, she refused to go downstairs. This time though, she went downstairs and went right to his office. Nothing was any different about the office, but she wasn't barking. She wasn't pacing. She wasn't doing anything. This was when I realized he was gone. I broke down. Suddenly, I felt incredibly alone. Even though it'd been about 8 months since he passed away, it was the first time I felt like he was gone. I hate to admit it, but this story is bittersweet. It made me miss my grandpa. Story 2. I had an interesting experience with a relative who passed away. In my case, I was more of a witness than the person it happened to. I was at my mother's house for a week. One day, a bunch of strange things started happening. The first was that we kept hearing knocking on our front door. I thought it was my young sister who was outside playing at first and gave her a reprimand, but she swore that she wasn't doing it. This got further exasperated when we started to hear the door open and slam shut repeatedly. We kept going down the stairs when no one came up to check. My mom gave my sister a big warning and told her she was going to lock the door. This is where it got weird because after we locked the door, we kept hearing it open and shut occasionally. That night, me, my brother and sister, plus our parents were in their living room hanging out. But this time things had stopped happening. But there was something else happening now. We could see the stairway up from our door and occasionally one of us would see a flash of blue light come from the stairwell. This was really freaking me and my siblings out. The night peaked when I saw a short silhouette move across the wall for less than a second. This was most bizarre because even if someone had been in that side of the room, there wasn't enough light to cast the shadow. My siblings and I slept in the same room that night because we were too scared to go to our own rooms. That was just the precursor to the real mystery of the story. I don't know whether I should consider these events linked or the things that happened earlier to just be a bad night full of ridiculous jump scares imagined by a household of on-edge people. The only reason I tell this story is because I've not found a way to dismiss what happened next other than by extreme coincidence. Even coincidence is hard for me to believe. After a hard night of sleep, we all woke up and went to eat breakfast. My mother came straight down from her room and said she had a dream about her grandmother. She hadn't spoken to anyone but her mother and her family for years due to extreme family relationships and maltreatment issues. She had had no contact with her grandmother or anyone else who had had tight contact with her for more than 15 years. My mother said in her dream that she was walking through a hospital. She ended up in a room that was much like a hospital chapel room. My mom said she saw her grandmother in the pews there, and that she looked even younger than she looked when she had seen her last. Her grandmother was laughing and happy. My mom said her grandmother got up in the dream and gave my mother a hug. She said that she was very sorry for all the bad things she had let others inflict upon my mother when she was a child, and she asked my mother to forgive her. My mother said she forgave her grandmother and had a feeling she was dying. She asked my grandmother what flowers she wanted on her grave, and her grandmother said she wanted blue flowers. My mother's grandmother then told my mom that she had to go and my mother's dream ended. My mom told us that she needed to call her mother because she was sure that her grandmother was dying and she wanted her to know. I personally was very skeptical about this whole affair, but then 3 days later, I got a call from my mom and she told me that her grandmother just passed away. Story 3. When my wife, then girlfriend, and I were in our second apartment, I saw crazy things all the time, but the first encounter was the weirdest. I was hanging curtains and standing on a poofy chair when I started to lose my balance. I felt a hand on my back, steadying me. I finished drilling in the last screw, then turned around to thank nothing. I expected my lady there. As soon as I turned around, that's when the feeling of the hand left me behind. My wife had been in a completely different room the whole time. I also saw a lot of other things, like shapes, all throughout the house and got touched often. The landlords lived below us and told me that no one had passed away in the house that they know of. Also, there would be these roughly human-sized black shapes, like black clouds. They moved very quickly and disappeared just as quickly. I saw them 7 or 8 times throughout the year we lived in that apartment. It was a great apartment, and even with all the spookiness, I never felt threatened. Here's to you, awkward bum-groping ghost. Also, there was one night I was waiting up for my wife, reading in bed. I nodded off and woke up suddenly to see a white figure at the foot of the bed. It looked like it was hiding behind the foot of the bed, and only its shoulders and head were poked above. It got startled when it saw me wake, jolted to its right into the wall and disappeared. It scared me the hell out, but it seemed even more upset than me. I don't normally tell that story because it's very easy to dismiss. Most times when someone has just woken up and they see a ghost, it's caused by just having been asleep and the various chemicals or whatever that's in your head at the time. I know there's an easy explanation to dismiss it, but that and the bum touch stand out in my head. Story 4. In my younger years, I came into some money after my father ended himself and I received an inheritance from him. At the time of my dad's passing, he and my mom owned a cabin up in Oregon by Mount Bachelor. The cabin had been put up for sale since my mom could no longer afford the payments, and renting it out was not covering the payments either. The cabin was set to go on the market for sale in less than a month and was in the process of finalizing all the paperwork with a realtor and lawyer. So for that month's time, the cabin was not going to be rented out any longer and was going to be vacant. I saw this as a chance to get some peace for a while and clear my head in light of all the things going on. I quit work, packed up my snowboarding gear, grabbed my dog, and headed up in my dad's car, that he had willed to me, to the cabin. This was our family cabin that my parents rented out throughout the year when we were not using it. I had keys to the cabin and also had the code for the alarm, so I did not feel the need to stop at the rental management company and advise them of my stay. My first 2 days at the cabin were normal and nothing out of the ordinary happened. I spent my days playing with my dog in the snow, snowboarding, and the evenings playing PlayStation or listening to music, drinking and smoking out on the balcony. I had already stocked up on food, cigarettes, and liquor, so I was pretty much a shut-in aside from the occasional outing to hit the slopes. With my dog as company and DVDs or PlayStation as entertainment, I was quite content and started to feel relaxed after all the drama that had preceded my outing. The cabin itself was 2 stories. The bottom story had the living room and a side guest bedroom, along with a small kitchen. Upstairs, there were 2 rooms, along with a walkout balcony attached to the master bedroom. Most of my time there was spent either in the living room, kitchen, or master bedroom. I never ventured into the other rooms, and always kept the doors leading into them shut. Anyhow, the 3rd day came around, and I was going through my usual routine of playing with my dog, playing games, and watching DVDs. That day was pretty heavy snowfall, so I did not feel like trekking down the hill to the main road in my car and decided to stay in. That's when things started getting a bit weird. In our area, there were only 2 other cabins adjacent to ours, maybe a block away from each other. All the other cabins aside from these 2 were around a mile away from ours. Surrounding us were mostly forests and very tall pine trees. Both of these cabins were empty. From the past couple of days, I knew that no one was currently staying there. Around midday, while outside with my dog, I noticed what looked like footprints in the snow around the area surrounding our cabin. It was still snowing, so the footprints looked semi-fresh, like someone had been there in the last 20 to 30 minutes before me. I thought that maybe someone was staying in the cabin near me that I may not have noticed. Maybe they were shut-ins like me. Alright, whatever. The prints led away from my cabin and they disappeared in the snow towards the denser part of the trees. I disregarded the footprints and went back inside. Nighttime came around and I decided to head to bed. My dog, Midnight, was lying on the bed with me when I noticed his ears perk up to a standing position. This was followed by him quickly jumping off the bed and running downstairs to the living room. I lay in bed and stayed silent, and I could hear him moving around the stairs back and forth. After around 5 minutes, he ran back upstairs to me and started to do his doggy dance for the sign that he had to pee or that he wanted to go outside. Well, fine. I couldn't say no to him, so we both went downstairs to the outside driveway for him to do his thing. Only he didn't want to pee. As soon as we were outside, he started to pull on his leash, trying to drag me to where he wanted to go. He kept looking to the dense part of the trees where the prints had been earlier, but he also kept sniffing the side of the house and looking up towards the roof. After he figured out that I was not going to go where he wanted, he sat himself down and just stared into the darkness. It was a bit unusual for him, but alright. Maybe there are forced animals out there that he wants to chase down. But I did not want to chase upon anything, so I pulled him back inside and we both headed back upstairs. Around half an hour later, I was lying in bed when I heard what sounded like hooves walking on my roof. It was only a series of around 6 steps, and I rationalized that it could be a pine cone falling from a tree onto the roof, or maybe a kind-hearted forest animal running around. But here's the thing. The steps seemed to be spaced apart like a man-length stride, so it was really freaking me out. Midnight also heard the noise and was quick to run to the balcony screen door, expecting me to let him out. Alright, you know what? I'm a tough guy and, at the time, considered myself to be fairly well built and strong enough to handle myself, so I grabbed my coat and shoes, along with my cigarettes and flashlight, and went out onto the balcony. As soon as I was outside, I lit up my cigarette and started canvassing the roof with my light. There was nothing there, and the snow on top was undisturbed. It must have been all in my head. What about Midnight hearing the noise? Maybe he was feeding off of my fear or paranoia? I started to calm down and relax again. My eyes started to adjust to the darkness and I kept smoking and just staring at the stars and trees next to our cabin. That's when I saw it. In a tree that was a little taller than our cabin and around 20 feet from the balcony, I saw what looked like a man crouched in a squatting position in between two branches. It was squatted on one branch and its arms were extended above its head, holding onto the branch above it. I wasn't sure if I was really seeing this thing, and I stood just staring at it, sat there motionless. I noticed Midnight stand up and start pacing behind me and lightly barking at the same time. The thing still did not move. I put my cigarette out and was debating on shining the light in the thing's direction, but something in my head kept screaming not to. So I walked backwards to the inside of the room and pulled Midnight with me. Once inside, I locked the door and shined the light in the thing's direction, but there was nothing there. I shut the curtains and the screen door and retreated back to bed, but later on in the night I heard light tapping at the screen door, like someone was tapping on the glass with their fingers. It was consistent and did not stop for nearly an hour. Midnight seemed to stare at the door, but he wouldn't go near it anymore. The weirdest part was that I had a feeling like someone was inviting me to open the door, but at the same time I kept hearing my dad's voice in my head telling me to stay in bed and not do it. I listened to my dad's voice and just stayed where I was. I passed out eventually and woke up in the morning and everything was normal. The rest of the week I spent there was non-eventful and nothing else out of the ordinary happened. I totally admit that it could have been all in my head. A lot of stuff was going on at the time and I was pretty messed up from all the drama. If it were me, I would have seriously gotten out of there when daylight hit. There's no way I would have stayed there. Have you had any creepy Sasquatch-like encounters in the mountains? Drop your stories in the comments. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons for more creepy stories. Story 5. I was living in an apartment with 3 roommates at the time. I was working all sorts of weird hours and would stay up late for most nights. Our apartment had 2 hallways that formed a capital L. Our room was at the top of the L, and the bathroom was in the corner where the lines meet. The door is in the middle of the small section, and the outside corner was the living room. I walked out of my room to go to the bathroom. There was no need to turn the light on as this was a track I had made hundreds of times before. As I left the bathroom, I turned to go back to my room. Just as I turned off the lights in the bathroom, standing where the short hallway and the living room met, there was a teenage girl standing there, wearing a white flowery dress, just smiling. She didn't look evil, just a normal person standing there smiling at me. I freaked out and went running to my room. About 20 minutes later, I finally came out of my room. I turned all the lights on as I went through the apartment. She was nowhere to be seen. However, where I saw her standing was noticeably colder than the rest of the apartment should have been for an August evening. Creepy, but not the worst part. I lived there for about another year and I never saw her again. After I had moved out, I was hanging out with my one roommate, who had the bedroom at the end of the small hallway, right next to the bathroom. We were talking and I told him that I never felt comfortable in the apartment after something happened, to which he responded, "Oh, you saw her too." I nearly drove off the road when I heard this. We then both described her, finishing off each other's sentences describing her. He had seen her twice. I was indifferent about ghosts before that. Now I believe in them, or believe in something. It was very creepy, and every time I tell this story, the hairs stand up on my arms. Story 6. I saw a shadow person once. I didn't know that's what it was called until much later. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a club, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day, my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, and I was alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side, then a bathroom with 2 entrances. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows on one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom, I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser and I just noticed movement out of the corner of my eye and looked down there. There was, and honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it, 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape but the scribbles moved, like electricity arcing. That's the best way to describe it. There was no sound that I could remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it. I wasn't afraid, just like, what the hell? And it noticed me looking at it. I can say it turned around and just focused on me, I guess. Then I was scared. Didn't move, didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen because it just freaking came at me. It rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut on it. Then I screamed. I yelled for my wife. She wasn't home. I went outside into the daylight and didn't go back until she got home about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural, but I know I saw something. I don't know what it was. Story 7. Me and some buddies were bored one night and decided to head out and poke around an abandoned mental hospital. The only way in was through the autopsy room. The rest of the place was pretty much sealed off, so we went in. As soon as we got into the autopsy room, one of the girls started hyperventilating and crying. She said she just couldn't be there anymore. We tried everything we could to convince her everything was going to be fine. To no avail. She wanted to leave, and wanted to leave now. Disappointed, we decided we had to leave. The 2 girls were walking in front of us, one trying to comfort the other, while me and the other dude walked a bit of a way behind. I don't know what brought me to look back, morbid curiosity maybe, but I did. Now, I'll admit it was dark, but the moon was out, so it wasn't pitch black. Still, I know what I saw. In the window on the second floor, a little girl in a white dress staring back at us. I looked for a good 10 seconds, stopped my buddy and had him look without taking my eyes off the thing, and asked him specifically, "Do you see that?" I thought I may have been seeing things, or maybe it was a trick of the light, but no. We both saw it, and stared for a good 20 seconds after. Might have thought it was some kind of trick, but after 20 seconds or so, it moved. We noped out of there, passing the girls and screaming at them to get in the car. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. People who used to not believe in ghosts but do now, what experience changed your mind? Story 6 will scare your pants off. See you on that video.